So we got the old batteries wearing out Roland. I think this is full humbucker. I think this is now humbucker and neck together. I shall test this, my theory. Ah, no. Okay, well that cuts that one. So that's like a coil tap, and that's a coil split. Ooh. Interesting. Alright, so got it wrong. The reason I thought that was connected, or I thought there were two on in that position, was because, damn it, sorry about this, was because I was surprised that the coil split thing was, I'll get this right, the coil split, the push-pull switch, was affecting the single coil, which it is, unless it's a stacked humbucker. Could be stacked actually. Okay, so there's no both on position then. We've got bridge, humbucker, bridge single, neck, humbucker or stacked, single. So, Patrick Eggle, New York. Never held one of these before. And actually, I really like it. I think it's a gorgeous little thing. It's compact. The weight is quite chunky here, so the weight sits quite nicely there. It's well balanced. It's got that headstock, 3 and 3. But it's got unusual tuners which I haven't seen the like of before, so maybe that's a Patrick Eggle's own. I'll look at those in close up in a minute. So it's got quite a bite to it, but if you go up the sort of I don't know, tone, you go up the power chart. See this amp. Can't quite handle it. Burp. Well, so nice little guitar, and it's so nice. I didn't even do a marker to make a noise. I'll just do one. I'll just do a clap so I can visually mark the spot. Because I have to line up soundtracks and stuff. It's a bit faffy. But meanwhile, once we've now got that off, let's have a look at this thing in more detail. Amplifier, excuse me. Right, we'll come and pick this up. So this is in for a setup light. In other words, it's getting a fret level but nothing else. Well, fret level, stretched out strings, recrowned frets, polished frets, that basic stuff. But there we have it. Look at that gorgeous little shape. It's like a little drop of water. I know it's got a bit of a Rickenbacker snarl down there, meets the Gibson double cut. It's got the nice 44mm thick body. Comes in a little bit for the belly carve, but it's quite mild. We've got a little bit of relief here, this waggly bit here for the knee, and that's it. Oh, and a tiny bit of forearm slope. I missed that earlier on. Look at that, tiny bit of forearm slope. So, nice old thing. I don't know the year of this, but it's got this bridge. I have seen this bridge before, and I can't remember who made them, but and then we've got that. Be interesting to know what the wiring is under there. Perhaps we'll have a look once we've done it. We've got a, looks like an ebony bridge, which is my favourite mix, well, favourite fingerboard material. Then we've got a bow nut at this end. Sorry, I'm not even looking through the screen. And so some of these strings that I was pulling on just now, going out of tune very quick, but James is a regular gigging guy, so he tends to put a set of strings on every night, and he uses the Harley Bentons, and I think it's an interesting test case because for setups I found I kind of use them for sacrificial strings, mainly because quite often they unravel when I put a lot of stretching tension on them. But for the price they are, James gets a gig's worth out of them and then bins them and gets a new set on. So he goes through a set for every gig, but it totally makes sense. There's a few little holes left over. This, I think, a feeling this could have been a synth pickup by the looks of it, from here and here. But a really nice compact little guitar, and I'm very naughty, so I traced around it and gave myself a little template. Well, I'm going to make a template out of it. Anyway, right, so this is an interesting one for me because I've jobs today include this. I've got a bit of work to mark a center line on the 7/8 scale Strat, or sometimes known as probably a bit of a Guthrie Govan copy. And then that's about it for tonight. Obviously I've got quite a lot to do still, but I'm pacing it so I don't burn out. Right, so we're leaving everything the way it is. The action is the way James likes it, so with a bit of luck we'll get all of this, all these strings off safely and back on safely so that we can do the fret leveling. What we noticed is the 6th and 8th fret on the treble side are both zizzing. There is some relief in the neck and about as much as you'd want, so we're not going to mess with that. So we're going to trust the power of the banana to sort that out. So what I'll do is, because it's not going to be a long video anyway, particularly, I'll carry on through the whole thing. Normally I would be setting the first fret action, the last fret action, and the neck relief together. There's some wear here that hopefully we'll get. Well, no, if we don't get rid of it as such, we'll ease quite a bit of it off. It's always, I say, when it's like this, I think it's pretty much entirely cosmetic. There's very little way that interferes with play. But it starts to look worn, and people like it to be tidied up. Personally, I don't like to trade fret metal for grooves that aren't affecting play. I think that's not a great trade-off. But since we're leveling anyway, that's the request of the customer, I think the good thing is that we can hopefully remove some of that wear, if not all of it. But often I will do the leveling, and once it's playing the way I want, I won't carry on leveling just to remove the fret wear. Had James come to me and said, I want to sort out these couple of notes, they're getting in my way, getting on my nerves, and would you do your utmost to get rid of that cowboy chords fret wear, I would do it, but that's a choice of the customer. I don't do it as a default. Okay, so now the nut is bone and the slots are fairly deep, so they may have some impact on the tuning stability, but in this case, unless I hear it pinging, then probably less than does the slack in the strings have an effect, because that's the other half of the deal. Yes, so I got my little traced drawing, and I got a couple of photographs of this guitar against white copy paper, and I can then sort of do a mock-up and maybe do a redesign or something to kind of customize it a little bit or make it a bit more personalized. But I just loved the little stumpy shape of it. It felt right to me. What I noticed was that the scale comes out at 626. Let me just check. So I'm just going to try and just sort of take any slack out of them, so that it's just be in tune while we level the frets. Okay, it's got a lovely neck profile. That's what I was also going to do. When the strings are off, you must remind me to measure that. That's part of my secret stealing of the plans. Don't let them know. So yeah, no big deal, but it's quite nice to have a template of it. Dun, dun, dun. Stick that down to some thingy. That stuff, 9mm ply, and then we'll have ourselves a template for some time in the future. So yeah, what was it now? I think it was 313.5. So it wasn't 628. That's all I remember noticing. To the halfway line. Okay, we had 316, 316, 316, right? 316, and that gives us the scale length. 316, 216s are 32, 632. That is 4mm above Gibson scale length. Interesting to note, really. I mean, it's no major thing. It's in the ballpark, and the guitar will work perfectly well because the bridge will be in the right place. He said. I didn't check the intonation, but I'm sure it will be in the right place. But yeah, just an interesting little thing there. 4mm difference. Bespoke manufacturers like Patrick Eggle can make the scale length anything they want, since they're manufacturing guitars. It's their choice. They can make them as odd as they like. And no real reason why not. You know, if it's a set neck guitar, you're not going to be likely to, well, the owner is not likely to be looking to put another neck on it, but it's not bolt on. So why not make it 632 or 640 or whatever you fancy. So now let us see what we've got here. Let's put this one. Not curved enough. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Watched some funny YouTube videos yesterday. Was it yesterday? The day before. I'm behind the curve. The young people know all about these things, but I happened to, by accident, come across this thing, which was a take on me, take on me competition, and the idea being, that's okay. The idea being, I'm just going to check this out again because that's sitting just a fraction too low. I have to just recalibrate. Yeah, so there was this challenge which said, how many octaves could they sing "Take on Me"? And some of it, and of course, well, theoretically, they weren't allowed to use any special effects. So it was quite an amazing thing, and I think there were a couple of people, a couple of girls who got just an impossibly high octave, like I think 3 or 4 octaves up from the original start point. I think the whole song goes 3 octaves, but they were getting up to the 4th octave. Anyway, it's quite interesting because you remember growing up with a song like that, and you never really stopped to analyse it much. Just kind of as part of the pop backdrop. Hey, rhymes. But now, to see it being kind of analysed like that is really fascinating, and I find, for me, I don't find it cheesy or anything. I find it, for me, it gives me a fresh appreciation of the song anyway. Now what I'm seeing here is we've got quite a weird thing going on. So, I wonder how you can see this. Oh, yeah, you probably can see it better from that side. So, we're cutting, not cutting, not cutting, not. So this section here is low, right, compared to the overall thing. Suddenly very high, very low, very high. Problem children. Cutting a bit low, okay, bit low, bit low, bit low, bit low, one high, one low, bit low, sorry, losing you, bit low, okay. So we've definitely got, as is quite common, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 zones on this neck, which is a lot more than I normally find. Now if you look down the neck at this, you really wouldn't necessarily see it. The issue here would be, often it's caused by little kind of clusters of frets going, being high or low, and sometimes they can be problems with frets being seated, and you'd be tempted to see this one as culprit, these two here as being excessively high, but and I think they are, but I think if we took those high ones out of the mix, then we're seeing one zone here, high ones kind of well in the way, so that's a zone there, a bit of cutting there, a bit of down there, one up, some down, 2 up, 3 up, so there's still about 5 zones in there if we discount these two and call them individually high frets. And if we kind of looked at the end of them close up, we could probably see the space under the ends. They don't look that bad, to be honest, but you can often find it fairly easily with the blade. Yeah, that's sticking right under the end there. Look at that. That's not really what you want. I mean, you struggle to do it on that one by comparison. You can eventually do it if you're very pushy, but this one just wants to slip in. So, different kind of approaches to this. Some people like to whack them down. Often I'm not that keen on it, but in this case I'll get a little wooden block and I'll do a tap down on those, since they're showing up as unusually high, but also not high as in high because the section of the neck is high, which is often what I see. Now there's a nice little bit of walnut. Let me just cut that a minute. Now, if this is glued in place, then sometimes what I worry about is that giving it a tap like this, I'm worried that it, breaks the glue join or whatever. So you notice I'm moving it along to support it, but we'll see if this helps it a little bit. So wood is nice and soft by comparison, and it won't damage the frets. So let's have a play and see how this sits at the moment. If the frets don't move with that tap, I'm not going to start whacking them or even clamping them any further. I'm just going to I'll use the leveling. Actually, that's not bad. That's pretty much. So what happens is when you have high frets, obviously we know that high frets get in the way. So if you play, if these two are high, but let's say we're playing here, if that's a very high fret, even if that's an ordinary level, kind of median level fret, the high fret here will get in the way and choke the note. Worse, this fret can be average, but this one can be low as it is, and even if that one's average, it can still choke out the note because a low fret makes the next one relatively high, and so it's a complex mix of the two. But that's pretty good. I'm going to give it a tiny bit more on that track, as I call it. So at the moment we've just done one pass with the, okay, where's it gone? One pass with the fret leveling tool, or the famous banana. And now I've tapped down those frets a little bit. I'm just going to give it another go and see if we connect with any of the other so-called lower frets as we do it. I'm going to just concentrate a tiny bit on the far end because there was a little hint of ziz up there, but very little. Okay, so we're just about touching these now, which is fine. So we're very close, and we've balanced. So we've taken the big ones down. We're bottoming out the low ones. This one's coming up high. There's still a couple here that aren't being touched at all, but they were playing, so I'm not going to over fuss with them. The idea about this kind of leveling is that I am aiming only to make the chosen action play. Perfect. So I don't really care about what in unevenness is below my chosen action. You get the point. It doesn't do me any harm when I'm playing, so why would I bother chasing it down to an absolute levelness when I'm not playing with zero string action. I'm playing with probably 1.2 millimeters at the high E last fret, that sort of thing. So that's one of the rules for me, is that I ignore the unevenness below the chosen action, because to carry on chasing it when you don't need to, all you're doing is taking fret metal from other places that you don't have any need to. So a bit on 12 and 15. So I'm just going to do a little bit more there. As I kind of suspected this guitar would be pretty good, but apart from the 2 frets that James pointed out and that I could hear today when I test played it. A little bit of extra focus at this end. That should be all right. So on this guitar like this, I'm doing the track. Playing individual notes, and then that's good. Now we're choking out here on the high E bends across here on the north side of the G string. So what did I say? Where is it? Okay, so let's call this 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 fret high E. It's choking out on a bend. So 17th high E, bend, choke. Now this is where hopefully we can recalibrate now for the G track, and it's the G track now I'm hoping to level out enough to allow that bend to go across. It's a very low action anyway, so you know, I haven't measured it. I've started with it as a given because that's what James is used to playing. So over here, the radius, the relief is deeper here, so I'm going to add some relief into here. A bit of a push and recalibrate. That'll be spot on. Now the G track, the famous G track that usually is the one that decides whether big bends and high E conducted at a low action. It usually it's the G track that determines whether they choke out or not. So by the time I'm here, I'm not really seeing any individual high frets or low frets at the moment. I'm just really concentrating on getting the smoothest, levelest possible playing area up here, so those big bends will be freed up as much as possible. And to be fair, that does take a bit of leveling to get there, because the geometry of the string bending is you're pushing the string uphill while its anchor points remain down at the bottom of the hill, and the more curved the radius is, the less tolerance you've got to bend a note. So we go, what do we say, 17, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. See? Freed up. There you go. That's the magic. Freed up that note for this very low action, which, if I get my measurer, John the Measurer, old people will get that joke. Yeah, when we're playing at 1.2, it's on the old regulation, and it's actually a little bit low on the bass side. About the same, well, maybe 1.34, something like that. Pretty much how I would set it up. So that's it. I'm happy we've rescued that bend note. Now we go on to the D track, and so on and so on. And after that we get with the masking, recrown, then we mask the board off, and then we sand and polish out the frets, and after that we clean everything up, and then we put the new strings on, stretch them out. Wow, see, that's interesting. It's almost like a different shape again. So that could suggest there's a bit of a dip somewhere in that other track. So I mean, the adjustments are tiny, so it hardly takes a breath of fresh air for this to kind of change shape. Still, I would say that's still a fraction above. It's purely experience and feel about how much to adjust it to get the change you want. And I've been doing it this way now for about 8 years, so 7 to 8 years. So it becomes second nature. Now since I know that the 2 high frets, or 3 possibly high frets over here, are kind of evened out by the time they even out by the time they come to here. What I'm really starting to concentrate on the wound strings tends to be what I call fret slap, which is a distinction I've made. I don't think anyone else uses it, so most people won't know what I'm talking about, but it's just a personal working definition, all right? I mean, I'm not trying to change the language about these things, I'm just using a word that works for me. And the reason I distinguish between what I call fret slap and fret buzz is I use the word fret buzz to mean the buzz you get when you get an individual high or one or two high or low frets in a very particular place, and that is fret buzz as we know it, and we know we've got to either bring down the high one or bottom out to the low ones to clear it up. Fret slap, on the other hand, is like that. Now that's what you get when, in my experience, the string is struggling in the overall topography of the neck. The ups and downs and clusters are just not giving it enough room. It can also be the case that you get that when there's too little relief. Now there's quite a bit of relief in this neck, certainly on that side, so I'm not going to do anything to it. But because we're getting a little bit of fret slap. Hang on, did I just test the wrong string? Now around the 12th fret, around the 12th and around the end I'll do a bit more, and this is on the D still. Yeah, so what I call fret slap is the thicker, more rotating or strings that move most are just running out of space in their rotation and their spin, such that they clip the top of little groups of high frets. So not the single high frets, but the little plateaus that I showed a minute ago. They're up downs, and they're so small you can't really see them, but funnily enough the wound strings tend to find them, and the gaps we're talking about are so small that even the tiniest if these hills and valleys kind of steal away this little tiny bit of extra space needed, then you get this thing called fret slap, or I call fret slap. And fret slap is defined by that kind of little buzz that follows you all the way. Now in my experience, you can't necessarily always remove all of it, because you're always keeping an eye on the metal and trading off and so on. But what I found is that you can improve it, and that's already improved it from what it was. So now I'm going to continue with almost no pressure, because what I want the bar to do is to kind of impose, that's just the end of the rod clicking, I want the bar to impose its curve onto the underlying frets, and I don't need to be hammering down on it. I just need to kind of almost use it at gravity level and just let it go a bit, so that this curve, smooth curve in this device here, lays on top of the slightly bumpy up and down neck, the less than perfect curve we could call it, and just gently imposes itself on it. And more often than not, that takes away or gets rid of altogether that fret slap that I was talking about, or at least brings it, like now, to a workable level. Now I'm going to do a tiny bit more on this 13th, 14th, 15th, just for a little bit more. So all I'm going to do now is just keep my eye on that little section there, and just now press down a tiny bit more, but only at that end. So I'm moving from side to side to spread out the movement of the beam across the radius. Okay, now I'm going to recalibrate for the A, and we're heading for home. Okay, a bit more curvature needed. Now sometimes you can use this in a quite a cute way. Last couple of days I was setting up a guitar that had no it had no relief in the neck. Nice guitar and everything, well worth saving. There was no relief in the neck, and turning the truss rod counterclockwise basically just wound the adjuster off the screw thread. So there was no positive curvature in the relief way. And so the only way you're going to get curvature in that, traditionally, is to put on really heavy gauge strings and hope that the strings pull that extra weight into, extra curve into the neck. And in the case of the guitar I was working on, the customer didn't want to change strings gauge. They had what they had and they liked those. So I was faced with a guitar that had basically no neck relief. And what I ended up doing was, and I've done this before, I ended up slightly overbending the truss rod so that in a way you sort of simulate a little bit of curvature at the very microscopic level, but you're not just dead flat leveling, you're cutting a little bit extra in this part, which gives these strings a tiny bit more room to move. Not so you wouldn't even notice it visually, but it's just that little bit of extra room, in the same way as that little bit of extra room helps get rid of the fret slap that I've been talking about. A little bit around the 12th, 13th, 14th, and that's it. Pretty good. So just again, come back with the beam and then focus in on 12, 13, 14, and I'm just pressing a little bit down there. And when I say I'm kind of concentrating on that spot, I guess what I really mean is I'm just, if I'm putting any pressure at all, it's on that spot there, 12, 13 and 14, where I heard that little bit zinging trying to play. I have to kind of read it, judge it. I'm going to stop there. I don't want to take lots of fret metal. It's incredibly low action. This is only going to improve it from where it was. So I'm not chasing absolute levelness at the expense of fret metal. Okay, this one looks about right. Okay, now we're on to the low E. Just as a quick reference point. Pretty good. Okay. There's definitely not a good one. 12, 13, 14th. It's not the 12th fret, 13th fret, 14th. Oh, anyway, those there. 13, 14, 15th. Horrible. Right. Okay, let's get at it. So we heard what that was doing. We know it's a mess here. So here we go with our banana, and again I'm going to start by using this very lightly, because as far as everything else is concerned, there weren't any obvious high or low frets. I'd say there's a cluster up there which are preventing the strings from moving freely, and I'm going to aim to tame those, and I think I can already see what they are. You know, we've got a patch of low ones right here, which then run into a high one, which is why it's struggling to play. So the low ones create a problem, and then it's made worse by the high one. Well, that's better already. So you hear how you can tell. And that's why I love this method, because it's the only method where you can actually see and hear the impact of what you're doing. And of course, the real benefit of that, which isn't something anyone thinks of when they're doing the other method, the real benefit of this method is you can stop precisely when you've freed up the playing action that you want. You've tamed the frets enough that they are playing great for the fret action or the playing action you've chosen. Right, that's what's good about it. So we've got a really high one here. It was high at the other end as well, so it was an unusually badly seated one. But I think we might just about be there. We've tamed the beast of the high fret, and we've also probably just lowered that general cluster a little bit. He was at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. There's a little bit of frizzle at this action. Okay, that's all playing. I'm going to do one last little pass down the other end a bit, and then I'm going to call it quits. Yeah, so that thing about stopping at when you've cleared up the chosen playing action is, to me, one of the biggest benefits of doing it this way. The other one is it is fractionally more accurate than doing it with the neck, the strings off and the neck flat. And the reason for that is that I'm doing it now with the neck under compression, which does things to the frets. It bunches them up, only microscopically, but it does do it. If I level this neck with the strings, if I flatten the neck, take the strings off, flatten the neck, and then level it, I'm leveling it without the strings being loaded. And actually, even those jigs that try to reproduce loading by bending the neck don't load it. They don't load it in the longitudinal compressed way. That makes the biggest change. So in this method, I'm not only leveling with the neck curved, which is part of the, so it's featuring, or it's factoring in the curvature. It's also doing it with the neck compressed as these two ends try to pull together. And so it's got both curvature and longitudinal compression. And that's why it's a slightly more accurate way. And that's one of the nice little benefits, but it's not the principal reason. The principal reason is, as I said, that I can stop as soon as I've determined that it's playing the way I want it to play, and then I don't take away any more fret metal than that. So there we are. So looking at the strings, each fret's got a range of different spots of extra kind of hard work that's been done on it. In other words, none of them are quite evenly misplaced. They're all kind of at odds and sods with each other. But that's what you get with frets, because they are unscientific, or fretting is completely unscientific. It's a brute force technique, and as a result, they'll all go in funny. It takes a grain or two of detritus in the corner of a fret slot to stop the frets seating properly, and then you've got frets sitting up at the edge, which you've then glued in place, or you have to then level down to make it playable, and so on. And you're seeing a bit of all of that here. So there's nothing unusual about this, and when I make a neck, I end up having to do the same. I think maybe 1 in 25 refrets or builds I've got ended up with a set of frets that are level enough to play straight away, to my low action anyway. They're all playable, but 1 in 25 maybe I can set to a really low action and just go straight off and play without having to do any leveling at all. But it is incredibly rare, and I can't do it, the factories can't do it, and I don't think there are many luthiers who can do it, and that's why almost everybody you'll ever have seen making guitars will put their frets, press their frets into the new neck they've made, and they'll level them at some point before the guitar goes out to its new owner or wherever, or goes out and gets played. So it's no failing, because it's just that the nature of the crude nature of fretting is such that you will not get a set of perfectly placed frets, and the reason why that is, of course, is that the distances we're talking about are miniature. So it only takes a sort of gnat's wing to get in the way and hold a fret up such that it won't sit down properly, and then it's the tiny amount that it sticks up is enough to cause the next one to choke out. It's very, very small. But that's a plus and a minus. We're dealing with tiny amounts all the way through. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, before I clean up and everything, is I'm going to mark up all the frets again. And then we're going to use the StewMac diamond offset diamond recrowning file. And it's a 300 grit equivalent. And that's important to know that if you use a file like that to recrown your frets, because when you come to sand and polish out, you've got to make sure that you're working with progressively smoother and smoother grit, so that you take away the scratches made by the last grade, and so on, step by step, until they're all gone. And that's actually quite hard to do if you jump too big a gap between things. So if for example this was 150 grit and you went straight to 600 paper, you would very likely leave some of the bigger scratches made by this in there, and you go through a whole system. Everything will look shiny, but you'll still have grit on your... Ooh, these are stuck on. Really? Oh, they are. Okay. These are additional stuck on thingies. Okay, be wary of that. They may... I don't know if James would know that, but I'm going to have to put extra little things on here so they don't come off with the masking tape. I'm glad I noticed that, because I'd just be a bit depressed if they came off altogether, which they more than likely would have done. So, crowning. Here we go. The purpose of crowning is to take a flattened fret, and by definition when you level frets you flatten them to some degree or other on top in order to achieve the levelness, and then when you crown them you take this concave file and you run it over the frets. I wonder if you can actually get a close-up enough to see this. I never usually do this, but okay. Oh yeah, look at this. Let's get on two so you can see the one after as well. Sorry about this. There you go. So you can see that I've cut a little, or the curved file, concave file, has gone down there and it's cut the edges off the flat spot. And the idea of this tool is to run it backwards and forwards, a little bit of tilting here and there, and the idea is to kind of gradually tilt it over and get it so that that little black line gets reduced down to the thinnest possible line, like that, and we stop there. So I'm going to now do this one too from the beginning. You'll notice that in between I'm just cleaning out the file with one of those wire brushes, just gently trying to declog it from the material, mostly the marker pen that I'm scraping off. You can see as I do that, you can see some of the little grooves from where still they hold the pen, and that tells me that I haven't removed them, but nor was I intending to. I'm just intending to get level frets as well as I can whilst leaving as much life in them as possible. And like I said, the aesthetic business of a few small soft grooves like that is not really, I wouldn't consider that a good trade-off against fret life, unless it's something that you specifically want me to do. So what we'll also see is that even though those marks are still left in the frets, when I come to sand them out, you'd be struggling to see them, because the sanding process will also soften out the last little remnants of them. So over time, you're doing this method, you get used to knowing what level of grooving, that you've left behind. You know what level of grooving will be nonetheless removed by the sanding and polishing process. And it's probably not quite, we're just a bit above it there, but I do know that it will reduce that to a hardly noticeable minimum. Okay, so we've got to go all the way up, and the harder we had to level, the more time we're going to have to spend recrowning. By definition, the more we did to level them, the flatter they have become. Now, it doesn't mean they're wafer thin flat against the fingerboard, but relatively speaking, it means the more material we had to take off to level them. Like that one was a bit harsh. Let's see the next heavy duty one. Suddenly can't see. Probably that one. They all look the same now. Well, I can find out pretty quickly by running the file over it straight away. You see the worst one. Well, that one's big. That one's flatter in the middle. That one's so-so. That one's so-so. That one's not so bad. That one's a bit flat at this end here where we hit some problems. A bit flat in the middle. So it's interesting, kind of, and obviously you're going to have to come back and do them all, but if you want, you can do that and spot the ones. That final one up here is going to take a bit of work, which you can't see, but we'll get to it. So it's a good way of keeping a sort of an eye on what has to be done and how much. So this one's fairly hefty, but you don't have to press too hard with the crowning file. This thing cost quite a bit of money. It was about 120, 130 pounds, something like that. But think about the fact that I've had it 8 years. It's worked every day of its life in those 8 years. Almost every single day it's done a setup. Non-stop, and it's still going after all that time, so I think that's an incredibly worthwhile tool. My ebook, 5 Steps to Guitar Setup Heaven, doesn't show using one of these. It shows how to do it with a much simpler, cheaper file, one that costs about £8 from Amazon. This sort of file, a 3-sided file with one soft edge there, and actually you can do, whoops, wrong way. You can do your, you can do it by leaning the file in on its soft edge towards the middle of the fret and do it that way. It's very effective. In fact, it's probably just a fraction more accurate in a way, but it takes longer. And if you do this every day, as I do, then having a tool that saves you a little bit of time is a blessing, you know. But my ebook set out to show how to make the banana file, how to use it, and also how to take care of the nut and the frets and recrown them, all with the homemade or lowest possible cost tools. Because the point I was trying to make is that you don't have to buy a lot of expensive tools to set up your guitar very well, and I showed how to do it in that book with very inexpensive tools. And the banana itself, the one I use here, that I've put back, the one you saw me using, that's about a £15 Martin acoustic style truss rod. They call it a U-channel truss rod. I first saw it in Stumac, and in fact I think I bought my own from there. But Martin style U-channel, like U-boat, but U-channel. And the reason I used that is because it turns out it was stiffer than the regular ones. I've got a regular one over here, which is probably a bit of a long overly. No, it's my original one. Yeah, so this one here is a standard one, and this works perfectly well. And of course, you can pull this out of a dead neck, you know, an old scrap guitar neck. This doesn't want to keep the sticky paper on it. It's been sat not being used for so long. But this one has a little bit more flexibility than the U-channel one, and I've discovered over the time that that business of fret slap that I talked about a bit earlier, that really helps to alleviate that. It really helps to have a stiffer rod matron, because it keeps its shape slightly better, and that helps the rod or the beam to scoop and create that little bit of space that the strings need. Now, I didn't know that when I started doing this, but it was something that became apparent after I don't know, about 8 years of doing this, 6 to 7 years of doing it this way, and I began to notice that distinction of the two types of fret level, or uneven fret, or fret noise maybe. So I gave them the two different names, and then it became clear to me that now I'm just concentrating, was suddenly thinking, whoops, I'm probably going to be rubbing off those dots any second now, but we've got to be able to get this clean at some point. We're going to need to clean it after I've done the sanding as well. So hoping it isn't going to pull the thingies off. Now this is a slight degreaser or solvent, so it could be that if I'm not careful I could encourage those to come off, but they don't seem to, they aren't threatening to come off just yet. Now there's a fair bit of grime in here. Just try not to press too hard onto the dots themselves. Yeah, anyway, so yeah, so over the years it started to seem to me that the stiffer truss rod was better for me to do the kind of work on those two, what I call the two different kinds of buzz. And so when I started to think of it from that perspective, oh look, boink. So we'll just gently glue that back on. We don't want too much glue, but we don't want it falling off in play either. Yeah, anyway, so I kind of gradually moved across to the U-channel file or truss rod, and since then I've just been using that non-stop. Now, get me a bit of that stuff, the super glue. Look down here, we have to put this nut on. Just need a little dab or two just to keep it in place. Now it's pretty well cut, so I want it to sit evenly and hopefully stick down. I don't want it going anywhere else. Okay. If I'd known I needed to stick that back on, I would have done that before taking the strings off, because then I could have used the strings to pin it down while it dried. But I didn't know, so now I'm going to bring you down this end, and while we're here, I wanted to look at something under here, and I wanted to see what the tone arrangement is on there, because I find the tone on this really good. When I played it, I noticed the tone was very progressive rolling off, and I keep finding so many variable results from tone circuits, and it seems to me in my mind that I only accidentally get a good linear tone roll off, and otherwise it seems to be all at one end, and that's using pretty much religiously using B pots rather than the analog or audio taper ones, which most people tend to use for volume. But it just doesn't yet seem to make a massive amount of sense. So I was kind of keen to know what liveth under here in the way of potentiometers. It's a little tiny one. Well, wow. Okay, so can you see what lies under there? Let's zoom you up. So we've got the coil split switch, which is doing a bit more than that. It's running, okay. Yes, no, there's two wires coming off the single coil, so that's going into the switch as well, and then coming out. So the switch is doing something to the single coil, which I know. I thought it was like, either splitting a stacked coil, or I thought it was possibly, I thought it was switching from double to single coil, or splitting, in the technical sense of the word, coil splitting the coil, like it had two wires, one at the start of the coil and one halfway through, and you can sometimes, or you can set it to split. But this is going, hot is going straight into this switch, which is then coming across at some point. We've got the sides are joined here. We've got the that looks like, what have we got? I can't see it very well. We've got all the grounds most of the grounds are happening outside here and wall of the cavity. We've got, that one's the switch, that's the output from the switch going to the volume. So what is that switch doing? Oh, right, this is working as a two-way switch. That's what we realised, wasn't it? So that's going hot in. Okay, yeah, sorry, listen to me. Like, you could have spotted that and told me. So what that's doing, that is right, that's working as just a two-way switch. I'm thinking it's doing some kind of clever switching. No, that's a two-way switch. So you've got one hot from one pickup going in one side, and then you've got the hot from the other pickup going in the other side. And this switch here just chooses which one is on. So it's only one at each time, which is what we saw. Then this is working as you'd expect. The coil split happens here, where a coil is sent to ground. And then there's this little tiny capacitor which I want to see what it's called. It's a B500K pot. So I'm going to now attempt to zoom in so far that we can actually see. I'm going to probably need to find some clever way to support this, because God knows. Hello, there we are. Oh, right. What way around? Oh, there's. Oh, hang on. So that's a treble bleed on the. Okay, there's a treble bleed on the volume of that side, but that's a different beast altogether. All right, I'll come back to that. Capacitor. Yeah, we're nearly there. Sorry about this. Mexico. What size? Damn it. Is that going to help me? None. None. So what we got, while we're here in this zoom up, that little thing, I'm going to find me a pokey thing. Go back. What we got there, that is a capacitor. One leg is attached to sorry, this we can't see it from here. One leg is attached to there, which is the input to the pot, and the other one is to the output, and that is a capacitor only treble bleed. And so there's our switch with, so I'm trying so hard to keep it still. Bridge pickup in, jumper across, neck pickup in, and that's the output. That goes to the output, but these sides are joined. So in on one side, in the corner, in on the other side, and then when it's switched up, the neck goes out there. When it's switched down, the bridge goes out there. And then, whoops, along from it, we've got the capacitor, the Mexico capacitor, same as that other little one, but now I'm going to try and turn it around, see if it will reveal its value in some way. I have a sneaky feeling I may have to just prod it a little bit to find its value. Bear with me. Ooh, it's going to tell us. It's going to reveal its secret. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, this is exciting. It's 223. So why is that working better than many tones on the things I've just been working on? That I don't understand. So if anyone very clever and what the word would be, electronical, Ricard, help me, Obi-Wan. That's standard. It's a 223, which is a 0.022 rated capacitor. Look at that nice little joint. Ooh, I like that. No shielding, nothing of the sort. Just good old-fashioned timber. And we gently lower these beauties back in. Right, I found all I wanted to know. I'm going to put back this one, which is a slightly different colour than the other ones first. And there we go. So, that's sort of answered my question, insofar as I know what the capacitor is, but I don't see anything about it. It's the correct rating. It's the same rating as I used the other day on something, and yet the tone sweep, and it was a 500K B, or B500K with a 0.022, and it seemed to be more or less on and off. So I don't get it. This seems really progressive, which is why I wanted to nose about and make sure I knew what was happening. So I know what's happening, but I don't know why. There are the mysteries of tone for you. Okay, well, enjoyed that little detour. Now what I'm going to do is pull back a bit, and the next part of the game will be to get some low tack masking tape, but before I do that I'm going to have to try and make some little covers that aren't sticky. I do not want to pull off those thingies, so I'm just going to start with that on each one, basically. These are mother of pearl, so somebody I think has just added these other ones on for easy recognition, because I guess the other ones were a bit unfamiliar. Anyway, this sometimes I have to do when I'm using, if I'm covering over Wilkinson pickups. My experience of them is that they quite regularly shed their lettering, which is a pain. So I'm just sort of tearing some thin strips for a minute that I can just tap down the paper. I'm going to bring the board up and cut strips to the size I need in a minute, but in the meantime I'm just trying to do little bits like so. Too small. Be help if I just cut it all on a board, but that's annoying me. So after that, we still got little ones there, so they're going to need thinner strips and thinner strips again. So just, it may seem like a lot of caretaking, but a little detail like this can be really annoying if somebody's used to their guitar having these little stuck-on things, and you, with the best will in the world, you come along and kind of pull them off with your masking tape, because you wouldn't really expect this to happen. I mean, you kind of, not many good guitars have stuck-on dots like this. There we go, I'm nearly done. Anyway, so the first ever Patrick Eggle to have crossed my path, and yeah, impressed with it. It's a nice little thing. This has got to be thinner because it's too flat now. Come on, you can do it. You can do it. Yeah, never had one before in the workshop. I've kind of seen them occasionally for sale here and there, but it's all a bit mysterious, so it's nice to see one for once. Right, what I'm going to do is pull off some ready cut thin ones a minute, but I'll need to bring this board up again any second now. I'm just using ready-mades to make this job a little bit easier. Oh, bugger. Come on, you can do it. Right. All right, I'm going to hang this up for a minute while I fetch up the board of cuttings and slice me up some new pieces. Might have enough on there to, no, I doubt it. Let's scrap the old stuff that's been sitting here and put some new on. Well, it was a sort of interesting to get through the other day when Putin made his big speech and not much came of it. I mean, nothing sort of full on and horrific, which a part of me had worried about. But having said that, there are quite a few people now kind of worrying about what the hell he's got up his sleeve for the 24th, the anniversary of the special military operation. And yeah, who alone knows what that could be. I think it can get quite terrifying to actually project forward and realise how little of how few ways out of this there are, which is probably the scariest bit, is that it's on a bit of an inexorable path. We're in a situation where there is no point in negotiating, nor would it be morally even right to negotiate. When somebody's invaded somebody's sovereign state, and it's always quite astounding, really, to hear all these sort of apologists for Putin calling in. No, first of all, I know the situation is complex. I know that no player is completely and utterly squeaky clean of all corruptions or funny tricks, and there's no doubt about it that Ukraine, by all accounts, was having a quite substantial corruption problem during its last 30 years. But this idea that we've been sold, and actually I have to say it's a lot been sold by the people working for Putin's propaganda social media world, the story we've been sold that there is no truth anymore, and you can't, there's no certainty on anything, so you can't say this person did something wrong because what about when you did that, therefore, oh no, moral morass, quagmire, lost in the fog, don't know how to make sense of anything. And that's exactly what Putin's regime has been fomenting in its interventions with Western media for probably a couple of decades at least now, or certainly the last decade, full on. And so you kind of listen to people who call in on a radio show, and they'll take one or other of the lines. It'll either be that Putin, is a wicked monster who's invaded a sovereign state and cannot be allowed to win, because otherwise, ... Or it's no, it's all NATO's fault for baiting the Russian Federation, and it's NATO's fault for, wanting a proxy war, blah 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 blah, and one of the things I noticed over the last few days of listening to the radio was the people who rang up in support of Putin all sounded, and in the way they talked about the situation, they had their, now this is going to be completely ropey analysis, right, but bear me out. They all sounded like the kind of men, first and foremost, who, if you knew them or were out with them for a beer or whatever, you would probably see fairly early on that they were the kind of blokes, and we all know people like this, who get what they want in life by, more or less, by bullying, in inverted commas. So they are the kind of people who, well, if I don't do it, somebody else will do it, so I'm going to do it. Or, I got her to pay double, or, the old dear didn't know what she was ordering, so I put a couple of those on the bill as well. This sort of winning at somebody else's expense. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean bullying all the time. but I know instinctively when I meet someone, if they're I have to win at everyone else's expense type person, and instinctively I don't like them, that kind of person. Simple as that. Now you could say, well, that's judgmental. Well, it is, and that's how animals stayed alive for a couple of billions of years, and humans stayed alive for a few million, by being judgmental in that respect, trusting the things that they knew, tacit knowledge that they built up over time. So it seems to me that if you support Putin, there are some commonalities with the people who support him, and that is that they are of the, well, it's a tough world, and if you don't fight, you'll get eaten up, so I'm going to blah, blah, blah. And they're like that in demeanour and practice. And the other thing is that they never hear them ever talk empathetically about, they endlessly cite 16,000 people killed in the Donbass by the Ukrainian artillery, which from every bit of evidence I've seen is a complete fabrication. At most it was about 16,000 over the period. But anyway, when they talk to you about those things, they only tell you about them, not to say that's a terrible thing. Think of those poor children. It's always to win the argument, to show why Putin's right, and it's never empathetically dealt with. So there's a lack of empathy. And by the way, I've watched hundreds of these Russian prisoner interviews now conducted in Ukraine, and that's the other thing that stands out an absolute mile, is not only the Russian prisoners have no empathy for anyone else, no consideration for anyone else but themselves, no empathy for the suffering of anyone else. Their wives and parents don't either, when they get the chance to phone them and they get into a conversation with the Ukrainians who are holding them, or the parents get into a conversation with the Ukrainian journalists who are conducting these interviews. And it's always about what they're, we haven't got the money he was promised. When's he going to be back? They lied and said, this is the Russian. They're complaining to Ukrainian journalists about how badly the Russian government has behaved. And there's not a bit of them ever goes, oh my God, I'm so sorry of what my son and his comrades have done to the people of Mariupol or anything like that, or God, our troops invaded your country, I'm really sorry, or it must be awful to be sitting there right now under, at first I only thought of my son's safety, but now I realised that blah, blah, blah. And there's no empathy whatsoever. And I've actually heard with my own ears phone calls with Russian wives giving their husbands permission to rape Ukrainian women, providing and laughing about it, providing that the husband doesn't tell her afterwards, and providing he uses protection, and then that's all right then. And so that the average people, some of the average people that feature in these calls, and they don't know they're being recorded, a lot of them, most of them, they know they're being recorded when the journalists do the interviews. But these people are, random people, can't even raise empathy. They have so much hatred, they don't even raise any empathy for the suffering of a woman that they have given their low-life husband permission to rape and then kill, because they're not going to leave them around to bring a case of rape against them. So it's a very strange thing to see how the camps fall into these two weird divisions between generally people with some empathy that care about the feelings of others and people who don't. It sounds so stupidly cartoonish, but that's what it is. I haven't found an empathetic person yet. My gut's instinct tells me, well, this person, they're empathetic. They're nice, caring human beings, and the only thing I differ from them on is their opinion about Russia. Never found that. The people who hold that opinion are the people I already the people they wouldn't like because they're not empathetic or empathic. They don't have any awareness of anyone else. And that's the old, it's become a common word these days in discussions. People talk about, what do they call them, sociopaths and narcissists. People, it's like talking almost as if it's a modern day phenomenon. People who, they don't think of anyone but themselves, and they cannot possibly even understand somebody else's feelings, or that other people even have feelings, because they don't, and they only think about what they want and need, blah blah blah. And yet here we are in a world where the opinion on this war seems to just break down into those two groups of people. The more I see it conform to those two things. And it just interests me that that's such a clear, for me it's such a clear division, and I'm trying to work out why it would be so stark a division, and why, if it really did fall down into those two, or that, there was a causation between those things, not just correlation, or some sort of causal link. I guess it, if the country of Russia is made in the image of a frightened imperialist, who thinks nothing of spending 1 million lives of his young people on dying in most terrible ways in the trenches of wherever. If somebody, you have to be a certain kind of person to do that, for a start. And yet I never hear anybody who is pro-Putin, never hear a single person ever answer or even account for what kind of person could comfortably, or could even send their soldiers unequipped to the front line to die underneath grenades dropped from what do you call it? Drones, in minus 20 degrees with hypothermia, so they can't even crawl away because they're 3/4 dead already. I just don't understand how somebody with any human decency or kindness or empathy could send people to waste their lives that way. And even if there was some sort of fantastically, noble cause that you had to do it for, then when you asked people what that cause was, they'd be able to tell you. They say it's for the blah 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 blah. We willingly give our lives for the safety or the sacrifice of whatever, and they don't. You literally never hear the Russian prisoners say that about why they are there. Most of them don't even seem to quite know why they're there, other than they recount some very boring, oft-repeated story about, well, once upon a time there were these two territories and people wanted to be Russian, and Ukraine didn't want them to be, and there was a referendum that they held, and they said they wanted to leave, and Ukraine started bombing them, and then they went to Russia for help, and Russia saw they were being persecuted, and people were being forbidden to speak Russian, and all that utter bull, because they speak Russian all the time. But anyway, that's the reasons why these men, that's part of one of the little reasons they came, along with the ability to earn, which for all of them is about 5 times what they could earn in Civvy Street. So the average wage that most of these mobilised men were earning was about maximum 30,000 rubles a month, and they get promised minimum of 180, 200,000 a month if they go to Ukraine. Right, what have I done? I've recrowned. Okay, I've cleaned them up. Now I'm going to sand them back. So this is boring and takes some time, so I'll carry on shooting in the breeze while this goes on, and I highly recommend, if you don't like my my chunderings, then turn the volume down or fast forward to the bitter end. But since you're still here, anyway. So, yeah, lacking empathy. The fact that, and these prisoners, when they're in these interviews, there's nothing sneaky about them. They're asked if they will want to contribute. The interviews are shown unedited. They give permission, or they don't get shown. And most of them do it for two reasons. One is so that they can get a chance to speak again to their loved ones. And the other part of it is that it's instrumental. If they can tell the journalists put up a video of them being interviewed in Ukrainian captivity, and that document becomes, in some cases, the only proof that their husband or son is alive, because the Russian government doesn't want to pay out on any war dead money, so it lists everybody as missing and then does nothing to find them. And the last thing they want is them to turn up, and they don't want to claim them back either. They just literally wanted to get rid of all these people. So the videos become a document that the family can show to the regional Ministry of Defense people in Russia, and then they have to admit, they're forced to admit that the husband is still alive and in captivity, and then the Russians are forced to be seen to be making some effort to repatriate them. And that means by swapping out Ukrainian prisoners for the Russians, which they don't want to do either. So, but even the families that speak to these journalists about their family members' activities, or why did you let them come here to do this? They all immediately deny any knowledge, and they claim that they have no interest in politics, as if that somehow makes their son or father, exonerates them from having any sort of shared responsibility for what's going on. And the truth is, they almost all go there for money, because they can't. And they all tell a story of how the money they're earning is never enough to get them out of their rut. So they're getting older, they haven't got a house, they can't afford to run a car. And so going to Ukraine offers them such a huge boost in earnings, if they get it, and many of them don't. It offers them such a boost in earnings that they can buy a flat or a car, and it gets them, some of them gets them out of the hole they've been in. The prisoners who go from the ones that are recruited by the Wagner group and go to the front line, they are always told that if they survive 6 months, they'll be returned home and their sentences will be completely pardoned. And so all of these men who sign up are doing it for the chance to get out of their prison sentence, sometimes as much as 10 years early. Now, I get it that some people... So then, if I tell you that fact, right, there are two types of people in this world right now listening to this. There are those who would say immediately, yeah, I understand that, I'd do that. Yeah, sorry, I'd do that. I want to get out, I don't want to spend another 10 years in here. And you are one of those people if you think that, because what about the fact he's agreed to be part of the killing machine of Russia, invading a sovereign territory, killing civilians daily by bombing them, and bombing the towns and the apartments and so on, trying to starve them out, trying to destroy their water supplies, trying to raze their cities to the ground. And you've chosen that over serving the rest of your sentence. And if you can see it like that, and that your self-serving need not to be in prison for another 10 years, if it's greater than your empathy, human empathy towards people who you might kill and whose homes you'll destroy, or whose sovereignty you'll take away, or who your boss will enslave, once you've done your work. If you don't feel, if you can still do only act in your interest after that, then you are one of those people that, in the half of people that seem to be devoid of empathy and compassion. And it is incredible how it's breaking down into those two groups. And none of the prisoners, none of the Wagner prisoners of war, almost none of them show any signs. The occasional glimmer of apology, but even then there's no conversation that goes with it that gives any sign that the people have even thought for 5 minutes about the misery they have brought in searching for their pardon and their get out of jail card, literally get out of jail card. They don't even connect it to, God, I was prepared to do that at the expense of someone's child, or I wanted to kill somebody's family and blow somebody's country up so I could go back home and see my little daughter or something. And if you're the kind of person that listens to that and go, well, I understand, when it's war, well, I'll do the same, then you are on the other side, I'm afraid. And you're much more likely to be a supporter of Putin than you are of Ukraine. And I don't know exactly what that proves, but I know that it's been fairly consistent since I've been looking at this, and it worries me that we seem to be in a time where there is this bizarre binary division between those who don't have empathy and compassion and those who do. And there doesn't seem to be a middle ground, which is really strange. But what worries me is that what falls into that same package, so that just as people without empathy and compassion have been far more likely, or in fact almost certain to support Putin, not Ukraine. I'm going to piss people off here now, but a number of people I've seen in that category support Trump over any Democrats. And that's kind of what frightened me about Trump, is not him as a person even, but the fact that he seemed to stand for a future without consideration, compassion or empathy. And I know that people who think they're tough and they live in a dog-eat-dog world think there's no value for those qualities. They just make you vulnerable, and look, you get run over, walked over like Ukraine, blah blah blah. But strangely enough, Ukraine seems to do a very good impression of a country that is both ruthless in defending itself at the same time as having compassion for some other people. I've even heard people who kill Russian soldiers knowing they have to for the sake of their own democracy and freedom, talking that they didn't actually enjoy it, but that they will continue to do it until it's done. Anyway, just one of those observations, and then kind of when you think about those things, I realise that I could probably divide everybody I feel friendly towards into the camp of people I would, by instinct, sense are empathetic, sympathetic, compassionate people. And by empathy and compassion, what I mean is the ability to see somebody suffering and to feel the pain of it and want to help, first and foremost. Even if the situation demands that you can't, but that you would feel the struggle of having to end someone's life instead of, doing it gleefully. So anyway, it's a couple of days spent listening to apologists and calling in and saying how it's all the West's fault. The West was basically, towing the Putin propaganda line, which was that we in the West were on the brink of invading Ukraine, invading Russia within seconds. So they had no alternative but to invade Ukraine. In other words, to stop us doing it. And there's no evidence for that, and there won't ever be any evidence for that, because it's not even vaguely credible. And yet the people who call in and are apologists for the Russian regime have to support that, because once you're in, it's like a commitment. Once you've sold your soul to that story, you've gone across to that side. And the thing about sides is really important, that people don't seem to be able to be in multiple sides at once and balance things up. But once they've gone across to that side, what goes with it is you have to follow the story. So you then inherit this ludicrous stories that you've got no choice as a believer. You have to stand there with a straight face and go, yeah. NATO was going to, they found there was biolabs, mosquitoes trained to sting Russians and not Ukrainians or Poles or something. With special genetically engineered that knew a Pole from a Slovakian and whatever, But then the person who's gone over to the side of the Kremlin side and believes the Russian story has to stand by that gobbledygook too. That absolute nonsense. And then they just look, you're left shaking your head thinking, oh my God, I cannot, there is no possibility of talking to this person. Just as there's no possibility, by the way, of disavowing somebody who believes in a God when, if you don't, no amount of logic will affect somebody's belief in a deity, because they didn't, and it's the old story, but they didn't come to that through a process of logic. In fact, logic is anathema to it, as they will prove to you every time you get a certain point in any argument about the existence or otherwise of a deity, a particular deity being discussed. But, those are not positions that people get to by rationality. They get to it by an emotional decision that often is called faith and other things as well. And it's just a mistake. I've long since given up even being willing to have a discussion with somebody about the existence of God or otherwise, because there's absolutely no ground on which we can talk meaningfully. And it's the same with apologists for the Kremlin. And that's why there is no point whatsoever in negotiating, because you are not even speaking the same species language, let alone language. When you look at Putin and his culture, his mass culture of drunken, unempathetic, angry people all dying to sign up to go and kill Ukrainians to pay off their debts or something, or buy a new car. When you look at that, you can't negotiate with people like that, because there's no logic involved. So I know, and people will go, oh, how dare you make such blanket statements? Well, I can, because I've watched a couple of 100 hours of those interviews, listened to probably a couple of 100 hours of phone calls, and seen probably more battlefield footage than a lot of people watching this video have or would want to, frankly. But I speak of what I know. We are in a strange age now where I can see the true effects. And there's a bit of an argument or discussion going on right now about this should really be made public. People should see this. And then other people go, do you want our children to be disturbed to show this kind of thing? And then I always feel, well, do you want our children to grow up not knowing what it truly means to go and fight in Ukraine? What it means to come to that pathetic end underneath in the eye, in the gaze of a of a $200, $300 drone with a strapped up hand grenade. I mean, that's the reality of it. Why shouldn't we be honest about that? Oh, our children will be traumatized. Well, I think they're traumatized by being brought up not to know that this happens. You know, and that by being they're brought up to be inactive in politics, so that it's considered a normal thing, like the Russian population has done, to trade your responsibility in politics handed over to an autocrat who wants to make it work for himself, and in exchange you don't have to be involved, you don't have to worry your head about it, as long as he doesn't, you'll let him do what he wants, as long as he doesn't, up till now, recently, he doesn't send you to get killed. And now that's obviously stepped over that line a bit, and it's going worse. But he's having to use other kind of extreme measures of stories of, you know, invasions of NATO and takeovers and all that stuff. But you know, I think people can live in that deluded, apolitical state of affairs because they enter into, a lot of those people that I've been watching and looking, hearing the stories of, they for years have traded off any responsibility for involvement in politics for, you know, better standard of living, which they enjoyed for 20 years or so, a bit better standard of living, and, you know, to be crude, enough to drink every night when they come home from their job, and maybe a holiday somewhere every year, and they've given away any care, or, you know, abdicated the responsibility of worrying about just exactly what that guy in the Kremlin was doing. And the reason I say that is because we're somewhere along that road ourselves, I reckon, with this, you know, I'm in the local parish council, and I have to say a lot of the village, a lot of people in the village, a fair chunk of people in the village, first of all, treat us as if we're crooks, right? Although we are unpaid, and we get it. The one people I know got into it because we wanted to make a particular difference on a certain issue of housing that was threatening to dominate the village. New housing that was too much for the size of the village. So I got involved that way. But the people who can't be bothered are critical, you know, are angry and rude to us, who are getting paid nothing to try and limit the amount of building in the village, and they treat us like we're the, what would you call them? You know, civil servants who are part of the scum establishment that they can complain about endlessly and treat as though we're subhuman or something. You know, they're entitled, because they're a customer somehow, they're entitled to, you know, be rude about us. It's absolutely bizarre, and yet those people have nothing to do with politics. They don't vote. They just, when they want to, they make a loud noise and say, oh, they're all the same, you know, they're crooked, bent parish councillors, bunch of unkers, and they don't vote. They don't come be bothered. Why don't you vote? I saw a bunch of rubbish. They're all the same. They're all the same. They're all liars, including the parish councillors. So everybody's a liar. And all they do is they go to their little job. They feather their little nest if they can. They go home and drink their little drinks and go shopping on the weekend or whatever it is they do. But we're developing a culture frighteningly more in that direction now. And the problem is that when nobody can be bothered to be involved in anything political, and it's all totally rational, why not? Because they're all so corrupt and dodgy, and they're all in it for themselves, and all that stuff that people say. It's totally rational. Everyone can agree with everyone else. There's no point. And when you don't, then what happens is the people at the top can do what the hell they like. And that's what the, it's a bloody flat blade. You know, that's kind of where Johnson and his Tory cronies have gone, you know, with a, you know, they can do anything, pretty much anything they want. And the plebs just have to kind of scrabble around and try not to lose their jobs or pay too much money for tomatoes in the supermarket or whatever low-level thing we have to worry about. But so I think this, I'm always very conscious of not kind of laughing at how apolitical or depoliticized that Putin's managed to make the Russians, because partly our government, I suppose, and certain parts of our establishment seems to have kind of led us in that direction, people in that direction too. And of course there's a huge part of it that's down to us, the fact we can't be bothered. And that we tell ourselves the story that life is, it's perfectly acceptable to just carry on looking after whatever it is you need to think about. Don't worry about everyone else. Just get your head down, get on with your stuff, set everything up the way you need it, and then, because hellfire, if you don't, no one else is going to think about everyone. Everyone else is out for themselves, aren't they? And that's I think that's a bit of a tragedy. But having said that, done a couple of years as a parish councillor, and the abuse that we get, because for a couple of reasons, sometimes mainly because where somebody who's obsessed about people not having building anywhere near their thing, they, believe it or not, surprise, surprise, they vote for it to be somewhere that's away from them. And then they accuse the council, who say, no, we're going to throw it open and we're going to arrive at the correct decision, and we're going to present the right evidence for why, when the villagers voted on that. But the people who want it away from their place hate us for doing that, because while it's undecided, there's still a chance that it could be near them, and they don't want that possibility at all. And they hate the fact that we sort of came on board to open up that possibility to make it properly democratic. But the point being is that for 2 years we've had, from a small corner, but we've had the most vile abuse for 2 years. And I know that proper politicians who get paid for the bloody misery of doing it, they also suffer from that, and worse. And some of them we've seen being murdered for putting their heads up above the parapet, which is horrific. But while the whole thing feels as thankless as that, it's kind of partly also understandable why nobody wants to do it. I'm gritting my teeth and staying with it until the people I've supported, my colleagues, the ones I support on the council, until they've completed the neighbourhood plan that we set out to ensure was done correctly. And I feel obliged to stay with it until they've got that completed to the best of our abilities. But as soon as that happens, I am out of there. I don't want to be taking that abuse anymore. But that's a kind of depressing thing to admit. But I would rather walk away from it than kind of face it in its unpleasantness. Weird, eh? Anyway, it was a good experience to do it, but it gives you a fair bit of insight into where we're at. But the reason I mentioned that is because I don't think we're too far behind sort of Putin. And Putin's more cynical in that he's planned this very carefully over the years, to depoliticize the entire Russian population, so that he and a very small number of, it's not even oligarchs, aren't the right people, KGB favourites really, FSB controllers, so he and they can, but mostly him, can retain power, and the ordinary folks have gone along with it and enabled it by, when the choice was there, they've voted with their feet for apathy and disengagement, and I think they got what they deserved. It wasn't what they exactly asked for, because they didn't ask for it. But a smart Machiavellian type of authoritarian leader came along and basically said, these people are ripe for this, that's what I'm going to do. I know how to control people, I've been doing this for years, and then when I've controlled them, I can make it impossible for anyone to usurp me, or shut me up, or change me out, and then I'll be free to do what I want, any old time. So, that's where I see it. So the thing I've always been very attached to, you may have heard me rant about it before, is the scientific method. And the reason I like the scientific method isn't even the fact that it's about science or concerned with science. What I love about it, what I respect and value about it, is the fact that it represents a time and a situation where a group of people, humans, from all around the world, have agreed to create what I call a third force, which is the scientific method, which stands above them and is the arbiter of a thing that we agree on as the truth. See, in this sort of so-called postmodern world, which Putin's played brilliantly into, and creating all this, there's nothing is true. No one's telling the truth. Everyone's lying to you. We're immobilized. The only one who isn't in that fug of, I don't know what's true anymore. Everyone's saying, what about this and what about that? And the only one who isn't caught up in all that bullshit is Putin and his people. They know exactly what the truth is and what they're doing. But everyone else is powerless in this fog of, but what about this and what about that and what about this, and there are no truths anymore, and I can prove just as many of those are true as those, and those aren't true, and then I go online and find this is true, and so nothing's true, and all that exists for us to disable people. And the scientists knew that. And for the sake of, in order to create a world in which they could progress ideas and develop them, they realized that the idea of this third force, the scientific method, was necessary. And the other good thing about scientific method is that it recognizes not only is it too easy to fall into opposing truths and get lost and trip each other up with, no, but that's not true, and this is a fake, and that's fake, and this is true. But also it recognised that we are all inherently biased, or we make decisions based on either our known biases or our unexamined biases. And the scientific method it represents a bunch of smart people enshrining that knowledge in a system that doesn't allow that tendency to run riot. So the scientific method anticipates that we're all tripped up, blinded by our own biases. And it only calls a fact that which withstands the tests that all participants agree elevates you to the level, or elevates your hypothesis about something to the level of workable, effective truth, as far as truth can be known, that we all agree on, that it's met the right criteria, it's been tested experimentally, and the biases have been eradicated because I've put it out for review to other people than me. Not other people out there who just want to shout it down, but other people in the scientific world, for example, who agree to be bound by the same rules. They test it out and see whether it holds water. And so that in the agreement between us all, us scientists, for example, I'm not a scientist, but in the agreement between scientists, you can guarantee that workable truths, as much as anything matters to be called that, workable truths are created. And on that, aeroplanes are built and people send things to asteroids and bounce little equipment off comets and land things on specks of dust in the outer solar system. And all of that because people agreed that in a world where nothing's true, nothing can be built and nothing can be done. And Putin's built that world, and he's built it not only in Russia, but he's also been instrumental in building it here. And we, too many of us, have not noticed that and been gullible and walked right into it. And the people phoning in those radio stations are some of those people. Anyway, why am I talking about this stuff? Well, because I said the other day, it's what's happening right now. And I've been doing this setup thing for 8 years, doing this same stuff every day for 8 years. And I thought when I started doing it, I worried that I would get bored within 3 or 4 months, because if I get bored with something, I just have to stop doing it. And to my amazement, 8 years on, I'm still not bored of doing it. Nope, not bored. But part of why I'm not bored is because each time I make a video, I have to talk about what matters to me more than I have to talk about pretty little fluffy things that might make the advertisers on YouTube happy. Because I don't care. I'm not in it for revenue. I'm not in it for the advertising revenue. I get what I need out of the videos, and if I make $150 a month, which is about what I make from the ad revenue, that's a little bonus, but I certainly am not doing it for that. And the reason why is because I've got no interest in making stuff for the sake of people liking it. The whole ego and everything tied up with trying to please people and trying to be funnier or shock horror than anyone else is a horrible pressure that I don't want. And also, I don't want to depend on a revenue that I've got no control over. So that's why I talk about whatever's on my mind, and to be quite honest, it's a bit short, a bit sharp. To be honest, the increasing likelihood, way sharp, the increasing likelihood of us getting blown up in a nuclear holocaust, I'm afraid, well, it's increasing. The likelihood is increasing. I'm afraid that's might not like the thought of it, but it is. Oh look, it's a undo it, push it back malarkey. Pain in the butt. This is not a great system, Patrick. You don't really need to do it this way. I'll show you. To make the intonation adjustment, which I have to take the B, in fact I have to take all of these back a little bit, because I know that I know some of them are out, and I'm going to work my way around. So that one's too, what's the word, short? No, I've got to come back this way. So there we go, there's our position for that one. Tie it down, and as soon as you lock it down, it wants to go forward. That's how naff this system is. And then this one needs to come back about the same again. And again, oh, it's undone itself. Look at that. Thanks a lot. Just what I don't need. Now, this one Does it want to go back in? Just, but it still wants to move. Yeah, this Wilkinson started doing this type of saddle where you had to undo and then push things back manually, and it's just not a great invention. Now I'm going to trust trust the system, the two groups of three staggered, and what I'm doing is I'm just going to push these ones into the right place if they're going to move. Holy cow, why isn't this one moving? It's probably under a bit of force still. And if I can't make it move, I'm going to tap it along very gently. So slightly forward of the G, which is where it's going. And then I'm going to try and hold it down and do it up. Okay, and now this one and this one, the same. Well, and even the slightest bit of string pushing down on it, and it wants to pull it back forward, so I have to pretty much slack it right off and then push it forward a bit. Now we're going 1 millimeter back on this one. This is a little freebie extra for James. Okay, now do these all up again. Tightened, 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 tightened. Zoom out. Doink. That's it out. Thank you. Now, once you slack the strings off again, you have to tighten them and do a bit of stretching again, because they won't go immediately to tune. Right, they're all staying in the right place. Sometimes what may have happened with these is they may have started out in the right place, and because they may have not been tightened down correctly, what will happen is the saddles will pull forward under pressure of the strings, so they end up in a straight line. Yay. Hey. Sorry, microphone. See how much slack I'm able to pull, even having stretched them already. Let me just check the height on this one, because this one feels barely 1.5. There's a bit of, that neck is making a couple of little creaky sounds. It's interesting. I've never heard that from a set neck. I know there's a bit of give on the trem there, but I've not heard a sec neck creak like that. I'm sure it's nothing bad. I'm sorry about this. Position is a bit naff, but I want to be able to reach these things. Because it's floating slightly, I think I have to keep working to get it in tune. If it was tied down, then it wouldn't be the problem. Alright, that's all I'm going to do. Anyway, yeah, so that's why I talk about what I talk about, because, do you know what? This could be, as Phil Collins sang, the last day of my life, my friend. Tell me, what do you think you would do then? And I wouldn't be standing here. I might be standing here making guitars or fixing guitars, maybe. But I certainly wouldn't be censoring myself and going, oh, I better not say that because YouTube advertisers or somebody who watches it might take offence and go, how dare you support Ukraine? Shut your mouth, you're just a luthier. Get on and do what you're supposed to do. So, if it was the last day of your life, my friend, you would not gag yourself. Yeah, so I would, personally, I would have this tacked down a bit more unless you're actually using it, because this is making tuning unstable, James. So I don't know if you thought about it, but I would put a bit more spring load on here. Just bring it back there so under normal playing it's not falling down, and your strings are a bit unevenly spaced. I think your high E is the wrong one, but sorry, your G is a bit higher than everything, and your D is lower. But anyway, that's up to you. Yeah, so it's later than you think, said Terry Hall, who passed away without ever knowing what the outcome of the Ukraine-Russia war was. Was he the lucky one? In a strange sort of way, eh? Enjoy yourself. It's later than you think. Something about being in the pink. Right, there you go. Patrick Eggle. If you get one of these through, take a copy of the shape, because it's very cute. Anyway, done. See you soon. Hopefully, I really hope.